Don Quixote. Can we call you Don Quixote? That's it. It's stuck. It's already there. Don Quixote has co-host powers, so we're ready to rock and roll. Okay, today is one of my favorite lessons. I'll probably say that like 5 more times before, the dawn, okay. I'll probably say that a bunch more times before we're done together because I have a lot of favorite lessons. But this one is really, really cool. The reason it's really, really cool is hooks by themselves are neat and a little bit more like self-explanatory, little easier to understand than this dot set state and class state. The effect hook is really cool, but by themselves, not really worth the effort to build into the system. However, with the ability to create custom hooks, it starts to get a little more powerful. And not only creating our own custom hooks, which we'll see at the start of our lesson, but be able to extend multiple pieces of logic to many components through a single custom hook is where the true power of hooks comes in. Like this is where stuff gets really, really cool. So very excited for today. We're first going to talk about what stateful logic is because this is what we put into custom hooks. So we have to understand what stateful logic is. Stateful logic and non-visual behavior are kind of the same, one and the same here. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about how to take stateful logic and build out a custom hook with that stateful logic and then apply that stateful logic to any component we want. So just think about that for a second. Without knowing how to do this, that already sounds like it's going to be really helpful. But it goes beyond that. We can create multiple custom hooks, compose them together inside another custom hook to be able to extend multiple pieces of logic to many components. So it just like grows exponentially what we can do with custom hooks. Today, for our project, you will be building a use dark mode custom hook to extend dark mode functionality to an app that's been built out for you. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the lesson today. First of all, let's define what stateful logic is. Can anybody help me here? What is stateful logic? Megalodon. Yes. Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, what is stateful logic? Good. Logic that lives on the state of a component. Logic built into a component that usually deals with state in the component. It doesn't always have to, but we do call it stateful logic because usually it deals with a component state. Chelsea is here to learn what it is today. Any case where you use state to change how a page renders. Oh yeah, I like that. Awesome, good answers. 15 points for everyone, including Chelsea, that answered here. Yeah, those are really good explanations. I like the name non-visual behavior. There are things that happen in our components that aren't reflected on the DOM. What I mean by that is, let's look at this component here in Training Kit. We have a simple form with a single input controlled by a handle changes function and some state. Our users see this on their screen. Our users don't see this happening They don't see that there's state set up in React and not in the browser. They don't see that this is a controlled input. All they see is that there's an input, I can type into it, I can hit submit, I'm happy with life. They don't see everything, all this non-visual stuff that's happening behind the scenes to make the app work. So this non-visual stuff here is, this is the non-visual behavior, this is the stateful logic. Again, like we said, it usually deals with state. So this, in this instance, that is true. We have input text on state, handle changes when our user types into the input is going to update our input text. So this is stateful logic that actually is dealing with state. If I can think of a case where stateful logic wouldn't deal with state, I'll try to mention that today. Okay, so let's jump in here. I'm going to, let's do this. I'm going to quick pull the, let's see, scroll way up. This thing that I built yesterday, this post for notes. Did you like having that? A post. Right, posts, please. Just give me a yes or no on that question. Emily, did I not share Slido with you? Okay, should have that. Yeah. Oh, there's a question. Gotcha. Ah, I see. Yeah, we'll get to questions in just a minute here. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. All right. Posts. Create new post. You guys are helping me learn and become a better teacher. Thank you. Custom hooks. I'll come define stateful logic during our break. But the reason I was asking about this now is let's do our guided project. And I don't want this underlined. So we'll have a starter code sandbox, a follow along code sandbox. This will also be our solution at the end of the lesson. Okay, so our starter code sandbox is going to be this one here. And I'll share this in here as well. And then our solution, or the follow along one, so that's if you want to watch the video later and have this code sandbox from a good starting point. But to follow along today, so the one that you want to fork right now is going to be this code sandbox here. Just gonna slide that over there. So this is the one we want. Let me change all of that to, okay. So this one right here, this is the code sandbox that you will follow along today. I'll pin this to the channel in case you need to refork or catch up with where we're at. Okay, here we go. Custom hooks. Let's see what this app is doing. First of all, you'll notice that we're using Material UI here for our app. And we've got some button themes and button styles. You can explore that later. Just want to mention that it's here. This use styles custom hook is being called right here and it's returning some classes that we're adding to our text field. So already we see that Material UI, with Material UI, we can create a custom hook that is going to extend some logic on our component. And this happens to be styling logic. So what's really cool about this is we could take we could export this, and anywhere we call use styles, we're going to get these classes here that we can call anywhere. For example, classes.textfield on any input, and we would have margin left, margin right applied to that text field. So there's a quick example. To see how this really works, though, we need to build out our own example. So we're going to start here with our input. So this text field is the component that is building our input from Material UI. So you can see that we have a value, on change, all the normal attributes that we put on inputs, and our label here, username. So this is a controlled input. We're controlling this with some state and this handle changes function here. Now this stateful logic is what we want to put into a custom hook so that we can extend this stateful logic and share this stateful logic with other components. So if we had another form in another component somewhere in our app, we would be able to use this custom hook that we're going to build to control inputs in any other form that we have. Now think about that. Think about how many forms a website usually has. A ton, right? Forms are the best way to collect data, one of the best ways to collect data from your users. Companies nowadays are all about data collection, right? I mean, that's even leaking into our politics of the day. That's how much data is a part of our lives and a part of business today. So if forms are a good way to collect data, then we're going to have a lot of forms in the projects that you'll be working on when you're hired and working for big companies. Now, let's say you had 20 forms in different components in your application. You would have to do this logic 20 times for each form, right? And even more times for each input that you have on that form. Let's say each form had an average of 4 inputs. That's 80 inputs you have to control through your entire app. Well, what if we could write one custom hook that could handle all of that logic for every instance of an input that you have in your app? Instead of writing this logic 80 times, you would write the logic once, call the custom hook in each of those components, and it would be able to control your input from that one function. So that's the power of custom hooks. Let's see how we create it. For now, we're just going to come down to the bottom of our file here, and we're going to create our custom hook here, and then after that, we're going to abstract it out into its own folder. Okay, so we've got a function here. By the way, when we're creating a custom hook, you should call it with the name use at the beginning of it, always. So never create a custom hook without calling it use something. So for this, we're going to say use input is a function, like that. Hey, we have our first custom hook. All right, have a great day. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Just kidding. I gotcha. You thought class was over. All right, so we've got our first custom hook. I'm such a dork, sorry. We've got our first custom hook. Now we need the logic that's going to come into here. So let's go look at what logic is controlling our input in this component. So who can point that out? Let's jump back in Slack and what is the stateful logic in this component? See, Daniel, that's why it was funny. You have to understand my humor. Okay, the on change, yep, handle changes is part of it. Okay, so let me write these down. We've got handle changes. Everything. See, ooh, the handle submit. For our input, that's more for our form. So we'll discuss handle submit in a few minutes. Still confused on what stateful logic is. Let's come back to that in just a second, Mason. Handle submit, clear form, handle changes. Okay, yeah, I like it. So handle submit, clear form. Not handle submit, sorry. Handle changes, clear form. What about our state? Did anyone mention our state? Who's going to mention state first? No one? I tried. There we go. State. Nice. Nice. State, yes. We also want our state. So this is all the custom logic, or the stateful logic that is helping to manage this input. Okay, so Mason asked a great question. I don't want to move on until we feel comfortable with what stateful logic is. So in a new thread, let's do a question here. And you, oh, let's see. Actually, we already did this right here. What is stateful logic? So let's come back up here and let's just review again what stateful logic is. I think the one I want to showcase is Collins. Logic that's built into a component that usually deals with state in the component. So I'm going to define that right here. Okay, so stateful logic, or AKA non-visual behavior, is logic that's built into a component. So then let me ask you this. Let's break this down. What is logic in this case? So what does the logic mean? Who can help us define this a little bit further? Because we don't want a definition with the same word in the definition here. We don't want to define a term using the same term. So what is logic? Yeah, a lot of good thoughts here. And I especially love those of you who are posting with question marks. So I think this is really going to sidetrack here for just a second to talk about how we learn. When I ask a question, if you don't know the answer, the effort that your brain goes through to try and think of an answer, even if it's wrong, before you hear the answer, will actually help you learn that thing better when you hear the actual answer. So those of you who are like, I don't know, I'm just going to guess, you're putting in that mental effort that is actually going to help you build the neurological connections even stronger even if your answer is wrong. That effort is actually helping you learn. So love to see that quite a few of you, you're not sure, but you're still making that effort to answer. Okay, Leighton has it correctly here. Just kidding. Let me see if I can find one that we want to use. This is pretty close. How the function operates, the way it's used, the functionality of the page. Oh, I kind of like this. Yeah, steps to do something. So this is, if we could do this, I think logic in programming is codifying or putting in code the steps to do something. All right, Carrie Ann wins 50 points for the day. I like this too, the reasons behind how a component works. The rules it follows, good. Cause effect. If input comes in, set it to the state variable. Yeah, logic would be the process of how things work. So the process, the steps, I like it. So let's define logic here. Putting in, or let's see, using code to let's see, steps to do something, process of how it works, the code we write to define the process it will take to do something in our app. That seems kind of vague, but I kind of like it. If anybody wants to riff off of that, see if we can come up with something else, go ahead and do that, and I'll check it out after or during our break. Okay, so hopefully, Mason, this helps. So when we're talking about logic, we're talking about the code that we write in our components that define the process that it's going to take to accomplish something in our app. For example, we have this, we decided, handle changes, is stateful logic. So this logic here is determining what happens every time our user types in our input. So every time we have a keystroke here, A, B, C, D, E, each of those 5 keystrokes ran this function. This function is logic that defines what happens when we type in our input. So what happens? What is the logic saying here? The logic is saying we're going to take this typing event, this keystroke event, we're going to take the value that our user typed into the input, and we're going to update our username state with that value. So this is logic here that helps us accomplish updating our state for our input. Okay, if you still have any questions about that later, Mason, then DM me and let me know, and I'll see if I can find more resources to help. And anybody else that is still wondering about stateful logic. Okay, so we've got handle changes, clear form, and state. So let's start with our state. So let's go up here to our component. We're going to pull our state out of our component. So this is the whole point of writing custom hooks, to abstract or remove from our components this logic abstracted into this reusable function. That's another term I probably need to define. Abstract. We'll do that. I'll do that during break as well. All right. So we're going to remove our state out of our component. We're going to put it into our use input. Okay, so we've got that part done. Now we want our handle changes. Let's go abstract our handle changes out of here. And into our use input hook. Okay, now we see some problems. We don't have set username anymore. We don't have username, and we don't have handle changes. So we need some way to bring all of that back into our component. Well, we have a function here. If we call this function, what can we return out of this function? If we call this inside our app, inside our component, what can we return out of this function that gives us these? Well, we can probably return all of these, right? So let's try this. Let's say, we're going to talk about forms in a minute here, so let's not worry about the clear form stateful logic. Here we're going to say we're going to return an array of values. We're going to return our username, we're going to return set username, and we're going to return handle changes. Okay, now we're going to take our custom hook. We're going to call our custom hook inside our component. When we call this custom hook, what is this going to return? What does this return for us? Almost. Yeah, it returns all of these in an array of values. Exactly. So if we get this array back, if we were to console log that call, this is what we would see. We would get this array back. So just like when you call use state and you get an array of 2 values, you're actually destructuring this array that use state gives back to us. So let's do the same thing here. Let's destructure those 3 things that we're getting back from use input. Again, we're getting back username, set username, handle changes. Username, set username, and handle changes. Ah, cool. So now we have all the values that we removed and abstracted into this custom hook. We call the custom hook, we get those same values back, and now we're right back to where we started, but without that extra logic in here. What's really cool about this, watch this. Let's take this text field. Let's copy and paste. Right now, if we type into one, then the other one is going to update because we're controlling it with the same value. But let's not do that. Let's say this is supposed to be email. And so we want the same class. Let's control this with email. And let's say handle email changes. So now we have a new text field for an email. let's see what we can do to control this, because I told you our custom hook can control multiple inputs, right? So let's call use input again, but this time we're going to rename the values that it's returning to us. Instead of calling this value that it gets returned username, we're going to call it email. And instead of calling set username, we're going to call set email and handle email changes. Ah, look at that. Now when I type into username, doesn't affect email. When I type into email, it's now controlled here. Inside our clear form, we can clear both. Both inputs get cleared out. There you go. How cool is that? We could call use input 10 times and have a form with 10 different inputs. And each would be controlled by their own instance of this state and this function. All right, one last thing before we look at questions. So we now have an email input that we're controlling here. So does it make sense to have const username, set username here inside our custom hook? Well, we can see here that it doesn't matter what the name is inside our custom hook. We can actually rename those values that are returned. We can name them whatever we want when we call use input. So let's just rename this to value and set value. So we have to call set value for the handle changes and return value and set value. Now we have a custom hook that makes sense for any input throughout our entire app. All right. Oh, and one last thing, if we wanted to give these inputs an initial value, then we would have to pass that initial value into this state here, right? Hello. So if this use state has an initial value, these inputs are going to have an initial value. Well, we want this to be dynamic, right? So we would want this to be dynamic. But we can do that if we just pass in some kind of initial value to use input. For example, if we want them to be empty strings, we can just do that. Or if we want them to say user and user at company.com, now we have a way to dynamically set initial values. Oh, it's so cool. We can just keep going. There's so much we can do here. But let's take a look at questions before I get carried away and get too excited, and we'll take a break. Awesome. I'm really excited about these books. This is one of my favorite questions I do. So I'll export this and post it in the channel and take a look at all of these myself as well. So let's go to questions. Here we go. Okay, Colin asks, going forward, will we be going back to functional components? I'm guessing our sprint this Friday will ask about class components, but just in general for new learning. I'm going to go back and forth between my lessons. I'll do probably 70% functional components, and I'll throw in classes every now and again just to remind us of classes. And I would hope, like I mentioned Monday, I would hope that as you're building projects, if you don't need hooks, today obviously is going to be functional because we're learning hooks. But if you don't need hooks, I would hope that you're doing about 40 or 50% class components in your projects, just to keep learning, just to strengthen the mental model, strengthen your understanding of class components. Okay, is a custom hook just a function in a functional component? Close. It's close. It has to follow the rules of hooks. So it's a special function inside functional components. So what are the rules of hooks? Well, I bet the docs tell us rules of engagement. Rules of hooks. So here are the two rules. Only call hooks at the top level. So that means in our component, we don't ever want to say, or in custom hooks, if some condition, then set state. So we're not allowed to do this. React hook useState is called conditionally. React hooks must be called in the exact same order every time in every component render. So it's telling us don't call this conditionally. We can't call any hooks, custom or not, in for loops, in if statements, in other functions. They must be called at the top level of where they're at. So that brings us to the next question: where can we use hooks? Only call hooks from React functions. So don't call hooks from regular JavaScript functions. Instead, you can call hooks from React function components or call hooks from custom components. By following this rule, you'll ensure that all stateful logic in a component is clearly visible from its source code. Okay, so again, we will not, why did that? That was interesting. Okay, we will not call any hooks or custom hooks anywhere except inside another custom hook. So we're okay to call useState at the top level of this custom hook or inside a function component. So we're okay to call useInput or useState or useEffect at the top level of these. You can explore more on why that is and what problems it would cause if you don't follow those rules. That's actually why we name custom hooks with the use keyword, so that our linter, ESLint, can give us the warnings if we're not following the rules correctly. Oh, there we go. All right, so that one. How well do functional components work as class components and vice versa? Totally fine. You can render function components in classes. You can render class components in functions. They work totally fine together. What doesn't work is trying to use hooks inside class components. Will you leave your code up over break? I like to get the reps of pressing down the keys, and if I'm not behind, and not just refresh your saved page. Oh, I see, yeah. Yeah, I can do that. What if the email have a different handle change? So yeah, there may be some special cases where one input has a different handle change. Maybe you have an input that's a number. Well, that still comes through e.target.value as a string. So you would have to handle that differently. And I'll show you a way to do that in a little bit here. Can we combine the two use inputs into one? When would that be desirable? Actually, I'm going to show you. The next thing we're going to create is a use form custom hook that will let us handle forms with as many number of inputs as are on the form, I don't know how to say that sentence with grammatically correct. That was a hard one. Okay. So yeah, we'll demonstrate this in just a minute. Can we always set the function to the value and then customize state later? Can we always set the function value and then customize state later? You'll have to clarify that question. I'm not 100% sure what you're asking here. So please clarify. Okay, why are the prep videos in TK missing for today? This seems like an important lesson. So moving forward, not many, we've worked really hard since we rewrote the curriculum with hooks to update each module with videos, and we've gotten through unit 2. So we're just starting on unit 3, creating videos for this content. So a lot of our looks like these were just created. They might not line up super well with our content. Those are a little bit old. A lot of these aren't going to have videos. So I really apologize. I 100% understand the value of these pre-class videos, but like today or like Context API next week, if there aren't videos, then just make sure you are following the training kit, reading through the content here. The videos and training kit, the text here usually line up. So you shouldn't have, you'll get the same content in the text that you get in the videos, but I totally understand that videos are easier for some people to digest and consume. And so I really apologize that we haven't gotten to that point yet. It does take a lot of work to put those together. So we're getting there. We'll have those up someday. But just a forewarning, I want to be fair and transparent. We don't have a lot of these for a lot of the remaining modules. We won't have videos. So I apologize. That is something that we are working very hard on accomplishing. Okay, let's take a break. I'll see you back in 5 minutes. I'm back. Oh. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be honest with you. This is not a very useful custom hook. I know. Why did we go through learning this? It is kind of cool when with the setup that we had before, but let me show you a more simple setup that kind of invalidates this whole thing here. So if I just go back, take all this out, const, let's have username and set username equals use state, and initialize that with an empty string. We'll do the same thing for email. So the one thing we're missing here is handle changes and handle email changes. Well, we already have, let's see what handle changes is doing. All handle changes does is call the setter function and pass in e.target.value. So why don't we just do this, grab the event, call set email, pass in e.target.value. Okay. Oh, not email, set username. And do the same thing down here with set email. Ah, nice. Well, now we have pretty much the same number of lines, the same logic that we had when we had implemented use input, right? So let's scratch that one. We don't want use input. That's boring. But what if we could write a use form custom hook that controls an entire form and lets us handle whatever amount of inputs we want dynamically? Now that sounds a lot cooler. So let's go up to our source folder here, and let's create a folder called hooks. Okay, make sure you're following along here. We skipped around in Training Kit quite a bit, didn't we? Not context. We want this one. Okay, so we've defined stateful logic. We have applied non-visual behavior with one custom hook, and we're still kind of on this point to build a better custom hook. All right, so we're going to, inside our hooks folder, we're going to have a use form.js file. And inside here, we're going to say export const use form is going to be a function that a custom hook function that we're going to build out. So let's go through this exercise one more time. What stateful logic is there in sign-up form? Let's bump this over to the right. We'll just close this down for a minute. What stateful logic do we have in sign-up form that we would want to pass to use form? In sign-up form. Okay, we've got 2 input fields and 2 buttons. So all the stateful logic that control those 2 things. So we've got clear form, helps us control our fields. Handle change helps us control our fields, all of their values. Our handle submit help us control the buttons in the form, and the clear form is part of that. Submit button, clear form, handle submit, state, clear form, handle change, use input. Yeah, so let's go with all of these. So we've got, for the inputs, we've got handle change and state. Then for the form and our buttons, we've got submit and clear. Okay, these are going to be this is going to be the logic that we want to build into use form. So our state is going to be a special one too. We want to be able to dynamically manage any number of inputs. All right, so let's start here. Let's see, how do we want to do this? So what I'm going to have you do is I want you to build out the state manager here and the handle change function. inside use form. Okay, so you're going to work on that on your own for about 3 minutes. And then we'll take a look at your solutions and talk through some of this. This is going to be pretty close to what we just did for use input. You'll have to think through this part and see if you can solve for this problem here. So I will put those tasks down in Slack. Everything is saved. So our tasks are build out the logic for handle change for the state and handle change. Try to think through a solution for this. And that's going to be dynamically manage any number of inputs. Think of what you know in JavaScript already that could help with this, because this is all just JavaScript that we're writing. All right, we'll be back in 3 minutes. Let's go 4 minutes. We'll say 4 minutes, and we'll see where you got to with these two. So don't post solutions yet until we come back together. I'll tell you when to post your solution here. We've got 45 seconds left. Okay, so when you have your solution, just copy the entire function here, put it into some code, triple backticks here, a code block. Oh, that's not a code block. Block. Don't submit it yet because we're going to do this all at the same time. So go ahead and get it ready. Put your solution in a code block in the thread here, and we'll post it together in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Post. Okay, we got 2. Come on. That was very anticlimactic. Come on, folks. We've got 4. We've doubled up. Well, 3.5. 3 1/10. We'll call this a 10th. There we go. There's another one. There's a few more. Come on, keep them posting. Yeah, we must be in Vegas. Hey, those aren't the odds that I like. Let's get a lot of people posting in here. Come on. That's okay if you got nothing. We're going to talk through it right now. Nice. Ooh, good thinking here. Okay, so let's take a look at these. I know this is a little bit harder because we didn't talk about this before. The handle change is going to be pretty similar to what we had down here. But whatever our value is for our state, we need to make sure to handle our set value correctly. Okay, so the way I think through this, first of all, I know I need some state. And it's going to have to be a way that I can dynamically manage any number of inputs. So I'm going to say const values, because I'm going to have multiple values, and set values equals use state. Not sure what this is going to look like yet. You may have noticed that you need to import use state. This is not a component, so we don't need to import React, but we do need to import any React hooks that we use. Okay, so we've got const values and set values. Now we want a const handle changes. Is going to be a function that takes in some event. We're going to call set values. Now we need to figure out this part. Okay, so we have a couple different solutions here. So Ali's thought is that we can take in an input of an array of inputs and map over those to handle changes for each input. That's a good thought there. Let's see. A lot of these are just haven't tried the dynamic managing yet. That's okay. This is a good place to start. So Darren is passing in some data and setting our data, and then mapping over it again and setting our new data in here. Okay, so a couple maps. So const value, set value would be use state. So key and initial value. Oh, interesting. So if we tell our form some kind of key and some kind of initial value, maybe we can set up like an object for that. Okay, so here Pedro has set value with an object, kind of what we explored down here a little bit. And in the handle changes, we've got const form value and set form value. In the handle change function, we are creating a new object, spreading in form value, and then giving whatever property we're updating the value. Let's go down that road. Let's see how that would look if we have an object for our values. If we've got a values object. So let's say we have, let me pull this out into a new window. Let's say we have this form. Oh, that got really wide. Wow, we need some constraints on there. Let's say we have this form with 2 inputs. Well, we could say that we've got an object with a couple values here. So we've got email is going to be an empty string, and username is going to be an empty string. So when we, I like this idea here. So when we return our values and handle changes, we're going to return them in an array. Then we can call use form here and use an object to control multiple values. So let's try that. Let's import use form from /hooks/use form. Okay, so we're going to import use form from our hooks file. Now we're going to get rid of both of these pieces of state here. We're going to say const sum array is being returned to us from calling use form. Okay, so this array has a values and handle changes items inside there. So let's go ahead and pull out values and handle changes from use form. Okay, so what does that give us? That gives us an object with an email and username, with email and username properties. So here and here, we're just going to say values dot email of values and values dot username. So by doing this, we're now getting to being able to control these both inputs with just this single object here. And let's prove that that's working. Let's say email and username. It is being controlled correctly. Okay, I like where this is going. I like the idea of using the object here. By the way, I thought it was very clever to do the input arrays and mapping over that somehow. I think this is going to be a little bit easier way to manage this though. Okay, so now we've got handle changes. Well, down here we were trying to call set username, set email. Now we just want to call handle changes and be able to update our values here. So let's call handle changes in both of these on change handlers. Okay, so when we type into either input, we're now going to invoke this function. So let's do this. Let's not set values yet. Let's just type in here and see what happens when we console log our event. So let's open up our terminal and let's type into username. Okay, so our event is a synthetic event from React, and the target is all of this. So let's see what target is, because we know with events and inputs, we can get the value from event.target here. So let's see what that is. Okay, so here's my event.target. So I have my input. I can see all the classes on the input. I can see the ID, the type, and the value. So if we console log e.target.value, this should give us the new value. If I type the letter A, this should give me username A. Okay, so that's good. So I am getting the correct value still from my event. So inside handle changes, I have the correct value here. Now I just need to know how to target the correct input. So let me show you a trick for doing this. When we've got multiple inputs that we want to control by one function, what we're going to do is give each input its own name. And that name is going to be exactly what the property name is on our object. So the name for this is going to be username. It has to match exactly what username is, what the property name is here. And this one is going to be email. So let's go back to console logging e.target and watch this. When I type in here, I now have a name attribute on this input. So what if I console log e.target.name? I get the name of the property on the object I'm trying to update. This might confuse us with these strings here, so let's change these strings to hello and world. It's going to be world hello, I think. Yeah, world hello. So if I type into username, I get the name of the property that I'm trying to update with my new value. If I type into email, I get the name of that property. So I'm going to do something that was demoed here by Pedro. We're going to do some fancy JavaScript here. And I'll show you how this works. So we're going to call set values. We know that values is an object. So we're going to pass in an object to set values. We're going to spread in all of our old values. And we're going to tell this here that we want to update some property with e.target.value. Okay, some property needs to point to whichever property we've typed into. So we can use e.target.name to accomplish that, right? If we say e.target.name, that's going to evaluate down to the string of whatever property we're trying to update. But we can't just use dot notation as the property name here. So we're going to do this cool trick using bracket notation. Since we know that e.target.name is going to evaluate down to a string, if we wrap this in brackets and we type into our username input, e.target.name is going to evaluate down to username. So we can use a string as the property of an object, as long as we are using brackets. So using brackets around this string is the exact same as doing this. So when we type into our username input, if we have e.target.name, it will dynamically do this for us. It will update our username on our state. If we type into our email input with this syntax here, e.target.name will evaluate to email, which is the same as doing this. So it will update our email property. And since we're spreading in our old values, we'll keep username here when we type into our email. And we'll keep email on this when we type into our username. Okay, so let's use this really cool dynamic property name setter that coincides with our input names. And let's go look at our component, our app state, or nope, our sign up form state. Our use form hook has email and username. When I type the letter A into username, it's going to update my state and update my input. When I type in A to email, it's going to update the correct property on state, which updates this. Isn't that crazy? It's so cool. This is, by the way, when we have a form controlled by a class component and class state, the state inside a class is always an object, right? So you can use this trick with the name attribute on inputs to control multiple inputs inside a class component with a single handle changes function. It would just look like this.set state, and you would set state with a new object and do this. With set state though, you don't have to pass in the old values. You just have to do that. So just a pro tip, let's just do that. Pro tip. This function can control multiple inputs in a class component. So I'll leave that there. If you have a class component that's controlling a form with multiple inputs, then you can use this same idea here. As long as you put the name that corresponds with the state property, on the input. This, of course, is set values and spread in values. Whew. All right, we're almost there. We just need our form logic handled inside use form. So let's look at questions, take a break, and come back to finish that. All right, can you speak a little about the make styles hook, taking in a function as a default value? How does that work? Yeah, so you can pass anything in here. So you could say some function, and then inside your component, just call that function. Let's see how it's being used up here. So yeah, make styles takes in. This is a function that takes in a function. This is actually, this is what we would consider a excuse me. This is a higher order function that takes in a function and returns a function. So use styles is actually the custom hook that's created dynamically by this function here. So I don't want to get too much into this because this is a pretty complicated setup. I want to focus on these inputs that we're talking through step by step. Let me save everything. Oh, save everything. Why is it not letting me save everything? What did I do? There we go. Okay. Good question. Again, I don't want to get into the weeds with Material UI. I use Material UI here so you can explore that on your own and just get exposure to some different things. I'm confused why mapping is a good idea for our hook and use form. Please explain what's going on. We're not mapping. So we're just using, the mapping idea came from some suggestions. Some people had maps. It was just their way of thinking through a solution here. So we're using an object instead to control every input here. We're not doing it dynamically yet because we're hard coding these properties. So in the next segment, after our break, we're going to talk about fixing that. Ooh, good question. If we were in a class component using this function down here, why would we not spread in this dot state? The reason for that is whenever you call this dot set state, React will spread in the rest of state for you under the hood. You just have to tell React which property to update and what value to give it. So we don't have to do this dot state because React does that for us. But when we're calling the use state hook and we have an object or an array, then it is a good idea to use the spread operator. React doesn't know and doesn't care, which is probably a good thing, doesn't care what the value is that we're passing in. It's not going to check to see if we're passing in an object and do this automatically for us. And that's probably a good thing. It's probably good to let us handle that kind of stuff here. But with set state, the state is always going to be an object, and so it's okay for React to handle it in that instance. Really great question. If you wanted to create a form with a password and use the same hook, would you need to add password state to your hook? Also, addition say for every other field. Yeah, we're going to do this dynamically. Again, this is not very dynamic because, like that question insinuates, what if we have a new input to add here with a password? Do we have to come update our use form hook that's supposed to be dynamic for any situation with password? Because that doesn't sound very dynamic. Right now it's not, but right after this, it will be. So yeah, there is a way to do it automatically, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But first, let's go ahead and take a 5-er. I'll see you back in a few minutes. Let's get back to work. All right, just a couple things we're going to fix here. First of all, we want to make this more dynamic. Also, we want to be able to clear our form without calling these individually. So the solution for one is going to be the solution for the other. That will wrap up this objective, and then we will get into this final objective here. Okay, so instead of, kind of like we did down here for use input, we can use this initial value as to help us make this more dynamic. So instead of, if this is the shape of the object we want to control our inputs, let's just pull this out of here and let's put it as a const above our function. We'll call this initial form values. Then we'll take in an initial value here, initial values, and we'll just pass that into initial values. We'll pass that into our use state. So that means when we call use form, we have to pass our initial values in here. Okay, remember how I just told you that the solution for this makes it so if you have an initial form values object for each page that has its own form, you just tell that page what your initial value, what your form object is going to look like. And let's just make these, let's go back to empty strings here. That should let us control these just fine. Now, I told you that this solution was going to help us with this solution. So how do you think we can handle this clear form solution with this? What do you think we can do here? Let me bring back our Slack. How do we handle clear form? What are your thoughts here? Yes. We have a function that's going to set our values, so we don't need to write a function to clear them. So let's do this. Let's just say set values and pass in our initial form values, but we don't have set values yet. It's not being returned out of here. So let's take our set values function, return it out of here, grab it from here, and now we have a way to reset our form with this object. Okay, very good. Yay, it works. It's working. It's working. Oh, didn't mean to save there. Meant to save. Oh, it is saved. Good. Okay, awesome. The final one is this on submit. So let's just do this. We don't have anything we're going to do. We don't have an API or anything hooked up to this. So we're just going to console log it worked. So right now, if we go to our console and hit submit, good. Submit is working. And we can do that here. This is part of the logic that we would want inside use form, right? So let's abstract it out of here. Let's say Control X, Command X, whichever you would like. And we're going to say, we're going to return this function. From our custom hook. So handle submit. Now remember, with arrays, when we're destructuring arrays, they have to be destructured in the same order when we destructure them, that they're returned here. So we can't just put handle submit. Oh, what happened there? We can't put handle submit here because now this refers to set values. Set values refers to handle changes, and handle changes refers to handle submit. So unlike object destructuring, these do have to be in the correct order. So we're going to do handle submit here. And handle submit is being called when we submit the form. So we should get this console log working. So let's check that out. We do all that. We click submit. Ah, it worked. It's so cool. It's cool enough that Crystal's dancing. I saw that. So yeah, that's really cool. But what if we don't want a console log? What if for one form we wanted to make an API call to some API, and for another form we wanted to just update some other state or change something elsewhere? This again is not very dynamic. So oftentimes what you'll see is I know this kind of takes away the purpose of the abstraction, but you will see some kind of callback function here. Const handle submit, and this is going to do something. So you can handle this either one of two ways. You can build all of this. You can just leave your handle submit here. Let's do this form callback. So you can leave handle submit out of your use form and just handle it here. Or you can define what you want to happen when you submit the form. And we can pass this into our use form call as a callback function. So that means that we would take in a callback function as an argument. And when we get done preventing default here, we just call our callback. So it's a little bit of an unnecessary abstraction. Again, you can handle it either way. You can keep handle submit inside here, or you can just do all of this here. It's up to you. If you do your handle submit here, you just want to make sure that E exists. Otherwise, you'll get an error saying prevent default, cannot read property prevent default of null. So kind of in the same form here, we could take this clear form and abstract it here and return it like this. Then you could have a single function. This abstraction makes a little more sense because this is going to be the same. This is going to handle this is going to be the same for every form, right? If you have a clear form function, all it's going to do is clear the form. We don't have access to initial form values, but we do have access to initial values. And this also means, let's see, what are we doing here? So this was used before it was defined, so we have to define the callback up above there. Okay, so now one nice thing about clear form, putting that inside our use form, is that we don't have to, we're not calling set values anymore. So we actually don't need to return set values, and that cleans up this hook's API a little bit. API is just a way to, that this form is interacting with this component. So it cleans that up a little bit. Okay, now that looks a lot better. Now we've got a custom hook that makes a lot of sense to take the time to build this once and dynamically with things like e.target.name, with setting up initial values, handling a clear form, possibly handling submit. This custom hook makes a lot more sense than perhaps a use input. Because look at this, look at our component now. Our component is a sign up form with 2 inputs. We've got some classes going on. We've got our callback. What do we want to do when we submit our form? And what does our form look like? What are the values for our form? How do we handle the state for our form? And we can take this and this into any component we want, and we could control components with 30 input, or we could control forms with 30 inputs. We could control forms with 5 inputs. It doesn't matter. This use form is going to work for any component that has any form with any number of inputs. Super, super cool. But it gets even cooler than this, because we can take, what we've done here is we've learned how to apply this stateful logic, this non-visual behavior, to multiple components with a custom hook. But what if we could take multiple pieces of stateful logic, compose those together in a single custom hook, and apply that to many different components? So what does that even mean? Well, let's say we have a use local storage hook where we want to, anytime we need to use local storage, we can call use local storage. And save any value we want to local storage. So the idea behind this one is should work exactly like use state, except any value, not exactly, should work almost exactly like use state, except any value that is controlled by this hook will be saved to local storage, saved, and persisted. Okay, really quick, have we used local storage? Are you familiar with the local storage API? Lots of no's. Okay. Let's do this. This may take us a little bit past the hour here, so let's do, but this will be important for our project today. Local storage API. All right, if we go to local storage API, let's go to the MDM documentation for this. So local storage is a mini database that lives in your browser and lets you persist data beyond refreshes, beyond closing your browser and opening it back up. Your data will be saved there. So when we want to use local storage, most browsers you can just say local storage, but sometimes you need to say window.localstorage. So to be safe, we're going to use local storage by calling window.localstorage. Okay. Now, there are 4 functions that we get on this local storage object. We get set item, get item, remove item, and clear. So we have 4 methods. Get item, set item, what was it? Remove item, and clear. Clear, remove item will remove that specific item. Clear will clear out the entire local storage. Why did these not? I guess I have to say, hey, you are a code snippet. There we go. Okay, so how this works is local storage works on a key value basis like objects. So when we want to add a new item to local storage, we give it a string as a key and a string as a value. So let's actually do this. So, yeah. Okay, so we've got our 4 functions here, our 4 methods. So if we want to set an item, we pass in a string for the key and a string for the value. That means if we have an object or an array, something that's not a string, well, we'll call this a primitive or value. Primitives are strings, numbers, and booleans. So if we have anything that's not those, like an object or an array or a function, then we have to stringify it. JSON.stringify value. I'll show you that in the code in just a moment. That will let us add objects or arrays or non-primitive types to local storage. Okay, when we want to get an item, we call get item and we pass in the string of the value, the key that we want to get. Pass in a string for the key we want to retrieve. Remove item, same thing. Oh, except it's going to be for the key we want to remove. And then clear, you just call no arguments, and it will clear local storage. No args. All right, so let's look at this. Inside use local storage, we're going to do a few things. We want to first, let's see. We're going to do all of this. First, we're going to set up a state property. We're going to capture the values that are being passed into our use local storage hook. we're going to check to see if we've already set that value to local storage. And if so, we'll use that. We'll use our local storage data. Otherwise, we'll set up our initial value. We'll update local storage when we need to, and don't forget to parse data from local storage and stringify new data getting stored. So let's do this, all of that up above there. Okay, that's a lot. I'm going to go through this. I know we're about out of time. This is something that we need for the project today. So I'm just going to walk through this, and the project will walk through it with you one more time. So you don't have to follow along at this point. I'll post this local storage hook in Slack when we're done. If you want to follow along, that's totally fine. All right, so first thing we're going to do is call useState. So I need to import that up here. And we're going to set up just a value and set value. Actually, let's call this stored value. That's a little bit more descriptive of what this hook is going to be doing. Okay, we want to pass in an initial value here. But instead of just passing initial value straight into our useState, what we're going to do is we're going to call useState with a function. So you can call useState with a callback function, and then whatever you return out of this function will be the value for our state property. So inside this function, we're going to check to see if our local data exists. So we're first going to see if local storage, let's call window.localStorage just to be safe. Window.localStorage.getItem, and then some key. Well, where are we going to get our key from? This is something we don't have available to us in this function, so we need to pass it in as a parameter. All right, so we're going to check to see if this is truthy. If this is truthy, that means that we've already stored this value to local storage. So we're just going to return that item. And that item, whatever the value is, what's been stored in local storage will become our stored value. If not, then we're just going to return our initial value. And that's going to be set to our stored value. Okay, remember, if we call return here, we're not ever going to hit this, this line of code, right? Because we've already returned out of this function here. Okay, one thing we need to check though, if this was not a primitive value and we stringified it, then we need to json.parse the value that it's returning so we don't get a string of an object, we get the actual JSON object. So we do that outside of the get call. Now, if this returns false, if we haven't already stored this key value pair in local storage, then we want to make sure to store it to set that item before we return our initial value. So here we're going to call local storage dot set item. And again, we're going to stringify whatever our value is that we're setting to local storage. Now, if this happens to be a primitive value, if it's a string or a number, that's totally fine. This isn't going to mess anything up. But when you're using local storage, when you set your item, you want to stringify it. When you get your item, you want to parse it. Okay, so that takes care of this part. If local data, if we have that data on local storage, use that. So we're going to use whatever is in local storage instead of our initial value. If not, we'll use the initial value. We've captured those values now from this inner function. So the next thing we need to do is be able to update local storage when we need. We're going to set a function here called setValue. This is going to take in some kind of value that we pass into it, and it's going to set local storage. Oh, when we set item, we need to pass in our key. We almost missed that one. Remember, set item, you pass in a string for the key and then the value. So when we call set item, we're going to pass in the key that we're calling and not the initial value now, the value that we get from this function. And we also want to update our stored value. So we're going to call set stored value with value. Okay, now watch this. This is the magic part. We're going to return stored value and set value. We're going to export, use local storage, and we're going to import that to our useForm file here. Wait, there we go. From / use local storage. Okay, remember how I told you that this should work almost exactly like use state, but except any value that's controlled by this hook will be saved in local storage. So instead of calling use state here, we're going to call use local storage. And we need to pass in the initial value and our key. So we're going to say the key, this can be any string you want. We're going to call this, well, we don't know. This form could be used many times, right? So maybe we need to pass in a key when we call our form and pass that in here. We don't need use state anymore. We can go back to our sign up form. We can say we're going to pass in a key, sign up form. Now this use form hook is going to compose all of this logic, and we can use both our form logic and our local storage logic in any component we want. And watch what happens. Is it still there? I don't know. Shrug. Refresh the page. Ha! It persisted. That was amazing, right? Let's get some emojis for how cool that just was. Come on, that was like the coolest thing ever. Even if you don't understand how it worked, that is really cool. No. Oh, man. Okay, let's walk through it real quick. I know we're past time. Let's walk through what exactly just happened, and then we'll be done for today. So first of all, let's go look at the way you can check what's in local storage is by going to the application tab, find your storage group here, find local storage. There's multiple kinds of storage in your browser. We're gonna go to local storage, open it up, and check here. Okay, so here is our sign up form key value pair, and you can see that we saved it here. Now, every time we type into this, it's going to continue to save those values in local storage, so that when we refresh the page, our use form hook is going to check local storage and use values that are in local storage before it uses initial values. So let's see how that works. This function, sign up form, this component gets mounted into onto the DOM. It's going to start evaluating line by line the code inside here. It's going to get to use form, and it's going to call this function. So we're going to call use form. We're going to pass in a key, some initial values, and our callback function. So use form gets called. That means we're going to start evaluating line by line here. Well, the first line we see here is use local storage. So we call use local storage. We pass in a key and initial values. So then we jump into here, and we're going to start calling this function line by line. The first line we get to inside use local storage is setting up state inside this hook. So what is the value of stored value? What is the value of this state? Well, first, it's going to see if we have any data in local storage from that key that got passed to us all the way back here inside use form. Then if we've already saved data in local storage, that's going to be our stored value. That's going to be our state property here. And we're going to return stored value back to where we called use local storage. So stored value gets passed to here. This values gets returned and passed back to our form. And these values control our inputs. So that's the breakdown. We call use form, we pass in this key, and we get values back. That key is passed into use local storage, and the values we're getting back here is the values property that we're getting back from use local storage. So use local storage takes that key, finds the data inside local storage that we've already saved, and returns that data as the value. So stored value, which is the data we have in local storage, gets passed to this right here, which gets passed to our values here. And it controls that data gets passed to our inputs. So that's the flow of how everything's working. It's very functional. This is what we call functional programming paradigm, where it's just this flow of function after function after function, and you kind of have to follow the arguments you're passing in and what's being returned from those functions to see how things are working. React and especially Redux are very, very much follow functional paradigms. So the more you get used to this kind of functional flow, the better and better you'll get with React and especially with Redux. Okay, you're going to use this local storage hook in your project today. I think it walks you through building that. But here it is anyways, since I told you didn't have to follow along. So let's check out the project for today. Today you're going to compose stateful logic for local storage and logic for dark mode. Excuse me. And you'll be able to, you'll open this project up. Actually, let's just do this. Code sandbox. Let me show you the project because it's really cool. I can just pull it up really fast right here by going to import, open up the project, and it creates it for me. So this is the start of your project here. So there we go. We've got some crypto trackers, gets us data for the top 10 cryptocurrencies for the past week. So all the prices here for the past week. This is live data. This is coming from an actual API. Your job is to write a use dark mode hook that composes the logic for toggling a dark mode and logic for storing that and logic from a use local storage hook to be able to toggle dark mode on and off in this project and have it persist, have that preference persist in local storage. It sounds hard. So the steps here are written out for you. So just follow these one at a time. You can see that the steps really are written out for you here. Okay, so make sure you're following each step. Don't forget anything because, let's see, replace the state hook with our hook, click the toggle and watch the magic happen. If it wasn't magical, you have a bug somewhere, go back through these steps slowly one at a time to see if you missed any steps. Okay, so MVP for this is to build a custom hook that lets you save data to local storage. And we walk you through here. Go through this, so the steps are here. So go through this before you just copy and paste from Slack. Don't just copy and paste that. Build out that local storage custom hook. Build out a second custom hook that sets dark mode class to the body element. Compose your two hooks together to be able to set and persist your user's dark mode preference in your app. Okay, so that's the project for today. There are probably questions that have come through. Yes, there are. There's a few questions on Slido. Feel free to jump out for lunch since we're 15 minutes past time. If you want to stick around for questions, then you can stick around for those. Okay, so there will still only be one callback function. This was about half an hour ago, so I'm assuming it has to deal with this. So again, you don't have to pass in a callback function. Most of the use form custom hooks I've seen people build have this callback functionality. But again, you could really just do that, right? And then your logic here inside each form. So I go back and forth. I wanted to show it to you because that's how most of the use form hooks I've seen work. So to answer this specifically, it all depends on how you write your use form function. Split view is really hard for someone to follow on smaller screens, and we cannot create new files under your code sandbox. I'll try to save it and fork it so we no longer follow you. Okay, split view is really good when we want to jump back and forth here and see what's going on between multiple files. And it's interesting. This is the hard part about teaching. I've had many people, when I don't do split views give feedback that they like split views because they like seeing the code side by side. So this is one of the things that I get feedback both ways, and I just never know how to do it. So you should, as of creating new files, you should be able to create your own files if you've forked off of my code sandbox and you're following along in your own. I'll think through this. Again, I'm split because there's a lot of people that it works really well for and some people that it doesn't. At what point will hooks become overkill and act like a component? I was thinking, why not render the input fields dynamically in the hook as well? We don't have a render function in hooks. So hooks, again, they are all about non-visual behavior. So you'll never render anything in a hook. So all custom hooks are for are to abstract the logic out of your component, not the JSX, not what you're displaying on the screen. And the whole point of a custom hook is, if this was the only component that was using this logic, I wouldn't abstract it out of here. I would keep that logic in one place. There'd be no reason to have two files at that point for sign-up form if I didn't have any other forms. So the whole point of something like a custom hook is when you have to share that logic between multiple components. Would we use JSON.parse to access an array of objects? Yes. If you have any kind of array, any kind of function or object you're saving to local storage, you need to use JSON.stringify and JSON.parse. Is local storage how you save username and password to pages for when you go back to a web page? It's not saved. That is handled by your browser, and your browser doesn't give anyone that's on your computer access to your username and password, because that would be really dangerous, right? If I knew that username and passwords were for Facebook were going to be saved right here in local storage, I would just go to anybody who would let me use their computer, open up their browser, open up the dev tools, and find that list. So the browsers, when they auto-populate username and passwords, that's handled internally where you can't see it, where they don't give users access to that. So it's similar to local storage, but without giving the user any access to that. My project worked without passing any key value. Do you have to pass a key? If you don't pass a key, let's see what happens here. So let's just do an empty string. And let's do that. Let's see what gets. Okay, so we do have this, so I can refresh. We do have it saved here, and it does persist here. The problem with this is if you did this for two forms, then one form would overwrite the values you have here. So the reason of passing in a key is you want this key to be unique for everywhere you use form, so that each form has its own field here inside local storage. So yes, it does work, but that's why we set up keys. Where is value coming from in set value in use local storage? Okay, so let's check out where value, use local storage, set value. Where is value coming from? Oh, great question. So where are we getting this? How are we updating stored value, and how are we updating our local storage? Okay, so set value is passed back as the array, or as a callback function here, passed out of use local storage. So use local storage is called here. So set values is set value. So when we invoke set values, we're invoking this function here. Whatever we pass into set value, that's going to be passed into as value and saved on local storage. So we're calling set values here and handle changes. So when we type into our input, handle changes gets called and passes in an event and passes in an object to set values. Well, set values, again, is this function. And we take this object and we're setting our new stored value. We're updating our stored value for the DOM, and we're updating local storage with that new value. So great question. I forgot to go through that part. That is an important part of use local storage. It's basically whenever you call set values here, it's going to, or on clear form, it's going to update both the values and local storage. Okay, one last question. Does parse.json break my code if we get back from local storage as a number string? Nope, it does not. Doing the parsing and stringifying with primitives is totally fine. So it's always safer to use the JSON functions just in case you have an object or an array, because it's not going to ever break on these primitive types. All right, it's 12:23 Mountain Time. So get out of here, go to lunch. Have a wonderful day. I'll see y'all tomorrow.